A very, very good afternoon. A warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay, and a warm welcome from Pearl Valley, which is where I find myself for the penultimate show of 2021. It is the last week of live shows before a much-needed break for Christmas, after what's been a rather busy last stage, including last week, the very first Dan Really Likes Wine Christmas auction, where, thanks to the extraordinary generosity of winemakers and wine producers around South Africa, as well as some very, very kind bidders who got stuck in to our online auction, as it was at the last minute for COVID reasons. We weren't able to have the assembled masses we'd hoped for, but despite that, online, we managed to raise R250,000 for the Reach for a Dream Foundation. So a really uplifting day and a really good way to end the year for both Dan Really Likes Wine and for the wine community, and especially for the Reach for a Dream Foundation, who do such terrific work with kids around South Africa suffering life-threatening illnesses, supporting them and their families. So thank you to everybody who got behind us, the Strauss team, Joe Ronaldo and my team, and everybody who both gave us wine and bought wine from us. We are most grateful. And this week has got a very simple theme. It is the theme of great wine. And on that note, some of you might have seen the Fine Wine Awards, Global Fine Wine Awards, came out at the end of last week, and amongst them a Best Award for Cabernet Sauvignon for Le Riche with their 2018 reserve. In fact, they won 2 awards. Their 17 got a runner-up, and a number of South African wineries got plenty of accolades. And we will be chatting to the man behind the awards on Thursday's show as part of our wrap, when we have a look back at what's been a very strange year in so many ways. But I think it's also been a very good year for South African wine. And I'm hoping from our very special collection of guests this evening, I shall get similar sentiment as they look back on not just their favorite wines of 2021, but also some of their best wine experiences, some of the coolest discoveries, wine they weren't expecting. And then, whoa, that's actually rather good. So we're going to get that from 4 and possibly 5 people whose collective opinions I hold in very, very high regards. Who are our guests this evening? Well, we have from the one and only Luvo Ntezo, who I know well. He's just a wonderful sommelier with a great story. He's worked his way through an industry he now sits very much at the pinnacle of. Bubbles Hyland from Well Read Wine Magazine joins us as well, a regular on the show. She's made me promise not to call her Mildred, so I won't for the entire show. I'm hoping to have Joseph Dhafana, formerly of La Colombe, but now branched out on his own into the wine industry. And as well as getting his thoughts on 2021, I want to see what 2022 has in store for the Zimbabwean wine maestro. Also, Stephanie Cartwright, who joins us from Saint. She's barely out of her teens and already one of the most exciting sommeliers in Gauteng. And then a regular on the show, one of my very favorite people in the wine industry, the intergalactic young wine writer of the millennium, Malu Lambert. What a collection, guys. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much indeed, Dan. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Oh, well, it's lovely to have you on. Let's kick off with our multiple award-winning wine writer, Ms. Lambert. 2021, it's been such a daft year for so many reasons. And yet I get the sense that for wine, there's still been a lot of excitement. There have been a lot of cool things happening and quite a lot of very, very good wine. What's your broader take on the wine year in South Africa? And then what has caught even you a little by surprise this year?
So before coming into the show now, I did a little scroll through my Instagram to see what I've been up to. And I've been up to a lot, actually. And one thing that has really stood out is regionality. I think there's a lot of focus on new regions, not just new regions, but regions in of themselves and what they can deliver. So, for example, I went on a mad road trip to the Agulhas Triangle with John Lefebvre and Christian Eads. And I discovered all the producers there of a very wild 2-day road trip. Incredible wines coming out of the Agulhas Wine Triangle, really like salty Sauvignon Blancs, which was so interesting. And my find from there, what I'm drinking today, is the Giant Periwinkle, if you can see that. Pierre Rabi, it's this tiny, tiny operation, and he is making incredible wines, and he's basing the structure of his white wines on acid. The natural high acids of the area, they'll shoot the top of your heads off. But instead of trying to fight against it, he's really working with the acid and creating amazingly structured white wines. I've actually started to call him the height of a Gallus, because it gives that same kind of luminosity and, you know, almost lit from within kind of energy that Height's wines have. Then, just in terms of regionality, again, the Roederer has been another standout for me this year. I also spent a couple of days there being entertained thoroughly with pizza parties and lots of Chenin Blanc. And the wines are really exciting and so distinct. And the people are so very passionate about what they're doing. And a huge congratulations to Elisma Visser, who of Olifantsberg won Young Winemaker of the Year by Tim Atkin. And for good reason. I mean, I sat with her on the stoep and we had incredible conversations. She is so ambitious, so talented, and really, really driven. And her wines are very exciting. The Olifantsberg Grenache Blanc in particular really stands out. But it's not just the new regions, as I said. I mean, even Stellenbosch, you know, is really emerging as a multi-pocketed place, and it's such a big region, and within that region there's so many smaller pockets to discover.
Which, in short, just such an exciting time for South African wine. And I suspect we could do several hours with Malu running through all of the discoveries from 2021. Just to note there, winemakers using acid, that refers to the wine, as opposed to Californian winemakers of the 60s, which was something just a little different. Hein Wagner is tuned in from Sweden. Time for a real blind tasting. Enjoy the show. If you don't know who Hein Wagner is, do a quick Google search. One of the most extraordinary people I've ever had on my other show, the Dan Nicholl Show, a man who is completely blind. He's done everything from an Ironman to holding a world speed record while driving. He's just an extraordinary human being. Hein, lovely to have you watching the show. All right, there's a snapshot of Malu's 2021. Let's nip over to Luvo, and the man who ethically runs the show at the One and Only. When you're a sommelier, Luvo, at a spot like the One and Only, you will have so much wine coming your way, so many estates, so many brands, hoping desperately to slip a bottle or two onto your wine list. What it means is you get to experience so much. What have been some of the new and different wines that have come across your palate in 2021?
Thank you, Dan. You know, 2021, many will often refer to it as a very dark year, a very challenging year, but there's always that bright spark at the end of the tunnel. And at One and Only, we're trying to do things different. We're showing quite a great deal of support in the wine industry. And my goal is coming towards completion right now. The aim was to have the wine list at the One and Only, the first wine list, not the only wine list, I hope, the first wine list in South Africa where every female winemaker in South Africa has got at least one wine represented. In September, every year, in a wine list, we sell wines made only by female winemakers. We've got a brand new wine studio that we've opened when we reopened after COVID. The hotel is going through some refurbishments right now. We will reopen again on the 17th of December. Things are looking very exciting. We were sitting at about 80% occupancy for the festive season until the news of the latest variant came through, and then we've just seen an abundance of cancellations. But then again, we are seeing people showing great interest, particularly from Johannesburg, the Garden Route, and so forth. So we're doing relatively okay. The wines are selling very good. I just came from the resort right now where we were looking at projections for 2022. So we are looking beyond 2021. Some really exciting wines, and the focus is to sell and promote more of your boutique family-owned wine estates that may have suffered a great deal more during COVID. So there's a lot of wine. I've got quite a few that I would like to share with you that I'm tasting. I'm tasting something from Wellington as well. Misha Wine Estate, quite small guys, but making really extraordinary, superb wines. We're happy to have welcomed them on board in partnership with the resort. Danny Steitlight Kabzecht is one of the new guys that we've endorsed greatly at the resort. So there's a lot of things that are happening. You should come in for a drink at the 17th of December, Dan. And everybody that's in here, I'm inviting you guys.
I suspect we might be part of a rather long queue, Luvo, but I love that approach. I love that philosophy in terms of the support both for the family-owned wineries as well as for women winemakers. Although good luck having a big enough wine list, because if you throw back to our month of August and the women winemakers we had on the show, we've got so many making such great wine. Even by the One&Only standards, that's going to be a long wine list, but what a good one it promises to be. One of our guests during August was Bubbles Hyland from Well Read Wine magazine. Bubbles, your dedication to drinking wine is reflected by the fact that by about 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, there's normally your first bottle opened purely for work and research purposes. And I'm most admiring of the dedication you have. You've had another year of tasting, drinking all sorts of good wine. Oh, we've got you loud and clear. I wanted to check with you, Bubbles, the wine that you've had this year. We'll get the best of it a little later on in the show. But for now, what have been the new, the surprising, the slightly different wines that have come across your desk in 2021?
Breaking. Sorry, I've lost you. Can you hear me now?
Oh, we've got you loud and clear.
Okay, sorry, I'm having a little technology problems. So it's been a really great year for me. I've tried to it's been a great year for Well Read, and I've been invited to lots of events and been sent lots of samples and things like that. But I've tried to separate myself from drinking what's been sent, and the PR, wonderful PR people of South Africa have been trying to get me to drink, and trying to step back and discover what I want to discover, and follow my palate rather than theirs, which has been an interesting journey. Going back to what Malu said about regionality, I think it's been really interesting. You know, we've all had to come together and save South Africa and support local, and really look after this wonderful industry we have to stop it dying a sad death, with all the restrictions that have been put in place. So a couple of things that have been that have happened. The Cap Classique route in Robertson and Bonnievale, they started up a Cap Classique route, which was really interesting to go and visit all the 9 producers up there who are involved, and really establishing themselves as one of the best Cap Classique producers in South Africa. And then Constantia have done something similar as well. They've also started up a Sauvignon Blanc route, celebrating their cool climate Sauvignon Blanc, which was really interesting. And I think this focus is something that South Africa can do really well, and is doing really well in their regions, is to sort of work out what they're doing best, and not just be trying to do everything for everybody, but focus on varietals and what they do best.
I've been watching and reading quite closely. It's very easy in this particular industry to be swamped by lots of fabulous wine, and the fact that you've taken that step back and decided to be a lot more selective in terms of what you're reviewing and what you're drinking is great for those of us who read what you do and get some very objective opinion on wine out in the market. So thank you for that. And I think it's a brave step to take, but a very impressive one. Joseph, I think we've got you from up your tree somewhere in Elgin. So let's see if Mr. Dhafana is there. Before we get your sense, Joseph, of 2021 and some of the new and different wines, tell us a little bit about the life of Joseph Dhafana, because 4 months ago, if I'm not mistaken, you said goodbye to La Colombe. No, we've just lost Joseph. All right, not to worry. Well, let's head over to Saint, where one of the younger sommeliers in South Africa has had another busy year. Because, Stephanie, every time I've been to Saint, be it a Friday night dinner or just a very relaxed lunch on a Wednesday or a Tuesday, there have been plenty of people, lots of them drinking wine. What's been new, different, interesting for you from a sommelier and the restaurant perspective for wine in 2021?
Yeah, for me, it's been a very eye-opening year. Obviously, in addition to kind of the hospitality side, which Marbles provided me the education for beforehand, with my WSET studies, the winemakers in the Cape have been so hospitable in showing me around and trying to give me a broader understanding of the background of wine. So yeah, new and different is where to start. I mean, we did a wonderful trip through Swartland and Elgin with ex-Amino a couple of weeks ago. And I think one of the best discoveries there had to be Testalonga's I Wish I Was a Ninja Pet Nat, which is Colombard of all things. So that's been interesting and new. Also, there's a whole discussion going on about closures at the moment, and I know a lot of people are talking of moving more towards screw cap and away from natural cork. The extremes like Neil Verberg are looking at using, crown cap, and I think that's going to present challenges in the future when it comes to presenting those wines in a restaurant, because I think customers are very used to the kind of romantic idea of corks. So that's been new and different. The restaurants, new and different zoo would be the most new and different challenge. So we've now got that on the cards and that up and going, which is interesting. But I'm not sure if I've fully answered that question. What else would you like to know?
Well, by an extension, how difficult is it when you've got three big restaurants like you do now, with Zoo added to the Marble and the Saint Stable, to introduce stuff that's a bit quirky, that's a bit left of center, a bit off the beaten track, onto a wine list that's reasonably well established? Can you slip stuff in, or do you find it's a little tough to do?
At each of the different restaurants, you've got very different markets with different levels of wine interest across the consumers. And at Marble, I think it's definitely the kind of institution where clients are a lot more willing to be guided and to try new and experimental things. Saint was a fantastic project over the last year. I was there from November last year up until this November, when obviously Zoo started. And over time, we were able to introduce a few new things, although traditionally they were more fans of the well-known labels, Miras Rubicon and those sorts of things that are recognizable, especially on social media, which I think plays a big part. When you've got people taking so many photos over lunch and so on and so forth, they want people to see what they're drinking and know what they're drinking, which I think limits what they're prepared to try outside of the ordinary. In terms of Zoo, that's a beast all of its own at the moment. Vic has put together our starting wine list, and the other evening we had someone come in with this incredible, weird and wonderful kind of skin contact wine that's incredible, but it's not something I think many sommeliers would be brave enough to list. And he was like, this is great, how can you not list it? So I certainly think that we need to bring on kind of limited quantities of the more unusual wines. So that's Testa Longa. I Wish I Was a Ninja, for example. We've got 3 bottles for each shop. So we're not holding a lot of stock, but there are kind of unusual things available if people do request them.
If I can take that as a point of departure, Malu, you mentioned the Periwinkle and the Agalis area and some of the slightly more far-flung regions that you've been to during the course of this year. What's your sense as a wine writer, as a wine judge, of the broadening of the collective South African palate? Has this been a year in which people have got a little bit more adventurous, or in the height of the pandemic and generally seeking shelter, are they moving back to the tried and trusted and the safe stuff?
Oh, that's a tough question for me, because I don't really hang out with the general consumer too often. But just then going back again to the regionality and what Bubbles mentioned now, the Constantia Sauvignon Blanc route, that I find so interesting, because instead of, having this kind of like supermarket-y Sauvignon Blanc, which anybody can make anywhere in the world, as long as you have the right yeast and equipment, smells like granadillas, there you go, drink it with ice kind of thing. But Constantia is really driving this idea of quality and site expressive Sauvignon Blanc. And I was lucky enough to sit on a panel this year with Matthew Day at Klein Constantia and a few other tasters for their new Klein Constantia estate Sauvignon Blanc. So we tasted through the various parcels and the various components, and it was such an interesting exercise, because you could really see the site in the wines. It's now just actually been launched. It's this wine over here. You can see that. And it's got a brand new label. So they're really driving the idea of quality Sauvignon Blanc in that region, something I think that has been needed to happen for a long time. So if we talk about the general consumer, I think this is quite an exciting moment for, the people who love to grab the Sauvignon Blanc off the shelf. And then, there are greater options out there.
Yeah, Klein Constantia is a slightly extreme example, of course, because if Matthew had his own way, every single individual wine would be made into an individual Sauvignon Blanc. He is slightly obsessed with the grape, but gee, he does make them particularly well in an area that not just has the wine route, but it's got so much to appeal, some of the greatest places to go and just sit and hang out and enjoy the view. What have been your standout experiences, both estates, restaurants, the general wine experiences that you've had in 2021, Malu?
Well, my greatest was 2 weeks ago at Wolfgat in Paternoster. That was just outstanding. The whole experience. I don't think I've ever been that excited to even go to a restaurant. The views were amazing. The fact that Quibus was there at every table, topping up water, topping up wine, explaining the menu. You know, the restaurant's been named the 50th best in the world. But there's no ego there. He could have sat at the back and sent out his staff to do all that kind of work, but he was at every table, you know, topping up water. I found it incredible. And the food was just mind-blowing. You know, you taste things you've never tasted before. He treats a seaweed like this underwater herb garden. I mean, there were seaweeds that tasted like truffles. And I asked him, how does this taste like truffle? And he's like, well, that's just its flavor. You know, he hasn't flavored it with anything. And his wine list is really quite interesting. I tasted a delicious Sauvignon Blanc there from Gedeelte, called Under the Veil. So it was made under a layer of floor. So, and this gave it quite a salty flavor. And this with all the seaweed and the seafood, it was just really like one of those moments, you know, I'll never forget. So hands down, the best lunch of my life, for sure. I also ate at La Colombe recently, which was also incredible, but more theatrical. So that was like almost a circus of courses. And yeah, but Wolfgat, I'm definitely going to say that lives up to the hype, more, you know, hugely.
I'm yet to get there, but it's firmly at the top of my list of destinations to attend to in the next year. What about wine estates? And I think particularly as we go into summer with tourism again taking such a battering, we're looking at any way we can to support local and to drive business into our tourism destinations. People coming into the Cape, people in Cape Town, maybe looking to just get out of town. A particularly special place or two that you've been to in the last year that you'd highly recommend?
I think it really, like, you know, the kind of experience you want to have. So if you've got the kids, taking them down to Boschendal, if you want to have a one-on-one tasting, book an appointment, you know, at Restless River, or if you want to have food and wine pairing experience extravaganza, definitely Creation. Kaapzicht has been doing a lot of work, and they've got a new tasting room. Donnie Jr. has taken over from his dad, and he's honoring tradition there, but he's also trying new things. For example, they've got a new way of style pinotage called Skraalhans that is very delicious. And this is coming from one of the most traditional pinotage houses in the country. So it's very exciting what's happening there. And they have the most beautiful Shannons, new labels. So that's something worth checking out, something new to see.
And if it's Dani Stakler, there will be 6 to 8 braais happening on a daily basis. The man who is as close to a wine barrel as any human being on earth. Lovely, lovely man. And a fantastic winemaker as his father was before him. The appeal of such places comes down to the hospitality that they give out. And the hospitality, the one and only, is legendary. Luvo has a big hand in that. We talked a little bit about the wines that you've tasted. What's been your sense this year, Luvo, when you've had tourists coming in, and it has been a hit and miss year once again? What are people from beyond South Africa looking for? What are they drinking? What is attracting them to South African wine as you're seeing it at the One and Only?
I think what we've seen, Dan, is both locals and international guests. Not so much in Europe this year. We had a fair share of American guests, but locals are still very much looking for quality. Price being not an issue. We haven't seen much rise in wines by the glass. So Sauvignon Blanc is still the best seller, Chenin Blanc being the second, Cabernet Sauvignon being the third, and then you move into your MCCs, then champagnes. I'm so happy that we've upped the sales on Genevieve MCC, which is one of my beautiful method cut classiques, something that's just so fresh and expressive and shows such a great character. It drinks beautifully with food, but you can enjoy it on its own. There's just been a lot of things that have been happening in the resort as far as wines are concerned. I fell in love with this Untitled Chapter, but there's a Barbera that they make over there, which I love. I bought quite a couple of cases, which I've got at home as well. Absolutely beautiful wine. I see Abri Biesler, my amazing friend, has released a white wine Chardonnay into his range to add into the Pinotage, which is also one of the wines I'm considering for a listing. So there's a lot of very much exciting wines the locals and international guests are looking for. Gone are the days now of public sweethearts, that big brands. People actually support these boutique small ones.
And if you're stocking Barbera and Gewürztraminer and other slightly difficult to pronounce after a couple of glasses of wines, then they're also obviously looking beyond just the more conventional varietals, which is great. It speaks to an audience that's got a sense of adventure to them, which can only be good for the wine world in South Africa. But when you adventure beyond the realm of the one and only, where are you heading, whether it's in Cape Town or out into the winelands? What are the places for you, Luvo, at the moment that are offering a really good wine and by extension food experience?
I'm so happy that I took my daughter last weekend. We did a tour of Durbanville. I haven't done that, being honest, for a very long time, and we live here. I visited quite a few wine farms. I never let them know that I'm coming. I never let them know what I do for a living, so that I get a very genuine, authentic experience. And what a great experience arriving in a wine farm, not telling them I know a thing or two about wine, and being given such a great hospitable experience. So I recommend to people to come and experience this beautiful little area. Great Sauvignon Blancs that we've got in abundance, amazing Pinot Noirs. We make some Cabernet Sauvignons in here, but also travel Wellington. You know, when I visited Misha not so long ago, I think in the last year, I've already made 3 trips over there. I think there'll be many more to come. Beautiful wines as well. I like the unconventional style of winemaking, kind of similar to the guys from Paardeberg. And I've got this beautiful Rouzan over here. I've got some Cabernet Francs from them. Just beautiful, beautiful wines. I'm planning a trip as well. So if you guys can just tell me what to do in the area. I've never been to Ottenikwa, Kalidsdorp area. So I'm planning a trip on that side. So anybody that wants to share where to stay, what to do in that area, I want to visit Boerplaats, I want to visit De Kraan, so that I can just fall in love with these beautiful Portuguese varietals that they've got on that side.
Well, if you do head up that way, you preempt some of my selections. One of my coolest discoveries this year, I got to head down to that part of the world, Luvo, and go and visit Leon and Margot, who, as well as making some rather nice Solar Cape vintage, are the team behind the Fledge. And they've got dozens of wine from all over the Cape, and they're making some very exciting and very left of center stuff. So I shall connect you with them. Be warned, you're in for some long but delightful nights. Bubbles, in terms of what you've done, your exploration, your adventures in 2021, what's got the Bubbles Hyland This Is Seriously Cool award for this past year?
Experience that was that really took my attention was up at Roederer. They've opened up a new tasting center, 2 tasting experiences where you go in underground caves. One of them is focused on Cap Classique and Champagne and how the production of Cap Classique, but also the history of it and the influence on the local wines. And it's an amazing experience. You go from it's like a museum dedicated to Cap Classique. It's just incredible. And then they have another underground experience where you go and you do the same, but with Chardonnay. So celebrating Chardonnay, looking at Chardonnay from across the world, different where it was originated and how that's influenced on the local wines. And it's just the most amazing experience. If you're a wine geek, or if you're not a wine geek, if you're just slightly interested in wine, it will just it will blow your mind. It's absolutely incredible. It's something that no one has ever done in South Africa before. Really taken that wine passion onto a new level and educating the general consumer. It's incredible. But apart from that, I've always been the person that I'd rather go to a wine farm that you can't fit a coach down, that you have to make an appointment to get there, and you have an experience with the winemaker pouring his own wines and telling you his own stories. And that's the kind of experience and engagement that I like. You know, wine is about stories. It is about the winemaker and the terroir and the farm and the family. And having that interaction is something that you can't really replace. So I was really excited when we went to Damascene recently and tasted the third release of his wines. And they're open by appointment only. And that is because if you get an appointment there, you will be tasting with Jean Smith, the winemaker himself and owner. And to be able to offer that and to have that interaction is something unbeatable, I think. And it just gives you so much more depth to the wines and the stories that come with it.
It's a particularly good way of getting to know a wine rather intimately. And if you're doing it with Jean, as I've had the pleasure of doing a couple of times, it's not going to be a short experience because he's going to give you plenty of detail, but it is worth every single second. By that point of departure, in terms of finding places that are a little quiet, a little harder to get to, if people are coming down to the Cape, or just as I mentioned earlier, in Cape and looking to get out into the winelands, possibly one or two others, Bubbles, that you've come across of late that you think are worth maybe the extra little bit of effort needed to get out to find them and to discover them?
Yeah, I mean, I let the wine follow me to where I'm going. So if I taste a wine that I really enjoy, then I'll sort of knock on their door. So recently I tasted with Catherine Marshall. Her wines are mainly Elgin based, but she's based in Stellenbosch. And she has some amazing stories to tell. And she's just opened up a new tasting room. So that was really, really lovely. And then I went and tasted with, when I went to Franschhoek a couple of weekends ago, went to Marina, and they're a Cap Classique special, Cap Caprice house in Franschhoek. And again, Nick Davis, the owner and the winemaker, he does the tour with you and he tells his amazing stories. Absolutely beautiful property and amazing Cap Classiques. I've got a bottle here. Trying to be as close as he can get to champagne. I mean, some of his wines are aged 9 years on the lease, so really beautiful, complex wines. Who else have I been to see recently? Brookdale is my new favorite home away from home. They're busy building a restaurant and a tasting center and a winery, but at the moment you can knock on their door and go and meet them by appointment only as well. De Toren opened up a tasting room earlier this year, which was absolutely beautiful as well. Really stunning wines that you don't get to taste every day. So I think I would just, Donovan Rahl I also tasted with, who doesn't have a tasting room, but you know, we found somewhere to taste with him. So I think if there's a wine that really excites you and the brand excites you, then if you come down to Cape Town, then these winemakers are sitting around waiting for people to taste with them, and they're not traveling. There's no traveling happening at the moment, so they're more than happy to taste with you and sit with you and share a glass of wine with you and some stories. So I think it's worth looking up your favorite winemakers and your favorite brands and going and seeing them.
I suspect there's some furious scribbling going on at the moment from people watching as they put all of those names down. I know Grant Sauls is amongst them. Grant's watching on YouTube at the moment. Great lineup. Looking forward to new wine recommendations for us newbies from your guests. Well, I think you've got a few to both drink and to go and visit Grant if the opportunity arises. Not surprised you mentioned Brookdale there, Bubbles. I saw some of your posts around visiting Chiara and her team. Such an exciting young winemaker and such a beautiful spot. So there is another one to add to your list. Easy enough to ask about the Cape and the surrounds when finding cool wine experiences. What about Johannesburg if we head off to our resident sommelier up at St. Anauzu? Steph, any particularly cool or exciting wine experiences you've been able to discover in the wilds of Gauteng?
Yeah, there's been a lot that's opened or closed and opened. So I'm not sure if you recall Thief Wine Bar. That was quite a feature before COVID, and that's now closed. Eleanor, however, is now working at Dry Dock Liquor, where you can find all sorts of unusual wines on the shelf. So I would strongly encourage you to go there. There's also a winery just up the road here called Kyriakis Wines, who I believe are getting their grapes from Adi Badenhorst. So that's a very, very interesting experience, very interesting concept. Other than that, yeah, a whole bunch of really, really good restaurants are opening lately. I mean, you would have heard Tang's obviously opened. They've got a great wine list. The Short Market, Proud Mary. There are wonderful, wonderful dining experiences that you can find up here in Joburg at the moment.
And I know you don't only spend your time at Gauteng. You referenced the Swartland adventure a little earlier. Have there been any other trips down to the Cape, anywhere else you've discovered in 2021 that's worth a mention?
Absolutely, gosh, there've been two really standout experiences for me so far in 2021. I think the first one was just before harvest, also during harvest actually this year. I went past De Tour, and Charles and Martin were very good in helping me with my Vitti and Vinny. And Martin's passion is barrels. And we ended up standing in a room tasting all the different components for the Book 17 and Fusion 5 and what have you. And I remarked that I thought Malbec often reminded me of my brother's socks after a long rugby match. And I'm not a great fan of the varietal. And outraged, they tried to convince me otherwise and did so quite successfully. And this led to us trying all sorts of different varietals out of different barrels with different stave components. And I don't think I'd quite fully realized the influence that barrel has and different toasting levels on a wine. And the extension of that was a couple of weeks ago, Marie from Sylvain was out, and they had a lunch at Waterford where she presented all the information on their cooperage. And then all the winemakers that use Sylvain barrels were asked to bring samples along to the tasting to kind of demonstrate the influence. And I think, tasting, I think the 2021 Murder that's going to come out from Remhoechter is incredible, just off a barrel sample. I think Kevin Arnold's got some great wines coming out, which are going to be quite amazing. Other than that, Chris Williams, formerly from Meerlust, is now out at Foundry in Voorpaardenburg. And that was part of the Examiner Swartland trip. And for me, his Rousson and his Grenache Blanc that he's bringing out are insane. So, I've never seen quite so much hospitality and quite so much good wine. But those would be the two standout experiences. And if you do find yourself kind of in the Swartland, I definitely try Foundry. Testalonga is a must try. And then you might be familiar with Hazendal Vineyards, obviously. So Clarice is their winemaker, and she's just this year bottled her first MCC called Il Gecko, which has been on the lees for, I think the one is 7 years and the other's 8 years. And it's a brut and extra dry. That's incredible to try. If you can get your hands on a bottle, and especially for the One&Only, if you're looking for little boutique wineries to support and things that are few and far between, I definitely try Clarice's new Il Gecko MCC.
Take notes, Luvo. Take notes. You're getting some shrewd advice here from the Marble team. We're already 40 minutes in. Where does this show go? My final question to all of you, and it seems like Pardew asked you any. We're going to have you all back again soon. And as I've got you here, Steph, we'll kick off with you. We've asked you about your discoveries, your surprises, the pleasant stuff. What about the very best of the best? Pick a red, pick a white, pick a Bubbles, something a little different. But give me what's it for you, starting off, Steph, as the very best wines that you've had in 2021?
You're going to think I'm terribly cliche here, but the De Compostela I thought was absolutely incredible. This year's release of that. I thought Ross Leet's release, the Devonian Shannon, was really, really good. That came out as well. Those would, for a straight up a red and a white, that, and then Bartney, their 2015 Skyfall Cab Sav, if you can get your hands on any of it. I know it's not this year's vintage, but I had the privilege of trying it this year, and it was amazing. So if you can get some of that, I would definitely go for it.
Google Brian Kluver and bomb him with emails. See if he will give you some. All right, a pretty rock star collection there, Stephanie. Thank you. Bubbles, over to you. The same question from a very, 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 very long list of wines tasted this year. What's top of the pile?
Yeah, it is a very long list, and it's been a very long year as well. So it's difficult to sort of think back and remember, but and it's also, we haven't really had the opportunity to taste as many wines next to each other as we would normally do. So you haven't had the sort of trade shows and the wine shows like normal. So I think a lot of it, the experience comes down to, you know, the stories and sitting with the winemakers, and that makes those wines stand out a little bit more. I think Damascene, definitely the Semillon. It blew my mind last year, and again this year it gets better and better. But actually, when tasting with Jean Smit at Damascene, the Moyamika Pinot Noir as well, which is the sort of entry-level estate Pinot Noir, was amazing, and I think one of the best value Pinot Noirs in South Africa, and a little bit more affordable than the other Damascene wines, and more of a sort of everyday wine. But I think out of the top wines, the Semillon was my standout. And then it's a brand that I sell, so I'm a little bit biased, but Ataraxia has always produced one of the best Chardonnays, I think, in South Africa. And this year he released his 2020 Black Chardonnay, where he tried a new technique. Well, it's not a new technique, it's about 100 years old Burgundian technique, that instead of working reductively with the grapes, you punish the grapes, and you throw loads of oxygen in there. You don't add any sulfur, you don't add any carbon dioxide, and he calls it a brutal act of violence on the grapes. And without the sulfur, without the carbon dioxide, the juice goes really brown, almost black. And then, as if by like a magical process during the spontaneous fermentation, it just turns and it becomes a golden, glistening Chardonnay. And they do this to work out the phenols in the unstable phenols in the wine. These unstable phenols are what makes a wine prematurely age, or makes a wine like a Chardonnay turn a little bit yellow with age. So by working these out at the beginning, then your wine should age a lot better and be more stable and consistent throughout the years. And it's such a pure wine. I mean, he always produces amazing wines of great purity, but this is it's just absolutely beautiful. It's got purity, and it's and that little bit of salinity, nice fresh fruit, but it's just a really, really smart wine. And it's different from the previous vintages, but it's still got the hallmark of the Ataraxia terroir on it as well. So I think that was my white wine standout. Although Donovan Rall, his Grenache Blanc, always blows me away. I love that wine. And then reds, the Jessica Salvine, I think it was the Nom Pinot Noir, I really, really enjoyed, really fresh and vibrant. And then I think Cinsaults have really, really excited me this year. Like Cinsaults have always had a sort of a bit of bad rep, that they're a bit more mass-produced, not so smart and sexy as a Pinot Noir. But I think they're really coming into their own, and there's some Cinsaults coming out with some really great personalities. And I think Pinot Noirs can be a little bit serious, and the Cinsaults are that lighter style of wine that just got a little bit more personality, a little bit more bubbly. So the one that I'm drinking at the moment is the Mars Mossop Chapter 1 Cinsault, made from Swartland, old vines in Swartland, and it's just exciting and bright and cheerful, and you can't have a sad moment when you've got a glass of good Cinsault in your hand, I believe.
I think that Cinsault story is quite a big one for 2021, but I don't think it's by any means finished. It's very much on the rise. I cannot possibly have somebody on the show who, despite really being called Mildred, insists on the title Bubbles, and not ask her about some bubbles, because you are something of an aficionado therein. What was the Cap Classique that swept you away in 2021?
I was actually... The marina that I went to the other day, I tasted some really great Cap Classique. And then up in Robertson, Silverthorn, I love the Silverthorn wines. And tasting with Peter Ferreira, my namesake, the other Bubbles, at Graham Beck. He actually did a tasting with us where we had to taste the two different wines and see which we preferred and what the difference was. And we found out that the difference was whether the bottle had been lying down or whether it had been standing up while it had been aging. And a tip that I didn't know is that Cap Classique you should always leave standing up. You shouldn't lie it down, because if the cork is actually just a sealing on the wine. It's not there to age the wine like a still wine is. So if you lie it down on its side, the cork is going to get wet, and the cork dies. Whereas if you keep it standing up, it stays alive, and then the bubbles and the wine stays a lot more alive as well. So that was an amazing tasting experience with Bubbles Ferreira. But yeah, I think the Silverthorn is always a great standout for me, and the Graham Beck wines were great as well. I'm trying to think now, I've forgotten someone off the list, but I can't think of the other Cap Classique that I loved.
Go through your Christmas cards. The missing one is the person you forgot. There's a pretty good selection, Bubbles. Thank you. Luvo, what about you? From that fabulous wine list of the One and Only, coupled with all the wine that comes across your path, what have been the proper rock stars of this past year?
My goodness, one of the most difficult questions to ask, Dan. I think one of the wines that stands out for me out of so many, if I were to just think out of the box, Ataraxia Chardonnay. The reason is Kevin Grant, Dan makes wines that are like his personality. He's just an amazing lad, and his wines are so clean, so fresh, so bright, so elegant, and there's just something so beautiful about that Chardonnay. Outstandingly superb. I tasted the 2017, which stood out for me. I'll always remember that. I have tasted on my wife's birthday something I thought I didn't want to do. We tasted the Paul Clouvet. Not the Paul Clouvet, what is this one? I put it here so that I remember. The Canon Cobb, the Paul Sour 2015. I opened this on my wife's birthday a couple of months ago. Just by looking at my wife's eyes and face beaming with joy, I thought, damn boy, I did something so right that night. It's a very beautiful wine, apart from just the 100-point Parker. Making such an outstanding blend is just about bringing all these varietals together and making something so complex yet uniform at the same time. It's just a really beautiful wine. Damn, Dan, I can't just think out of Paul Clouvet Sauvignon Blanc. Why that wine? It was the first wine I tasted out of coming from COVID in March in East Africa this year. Just to appreciate the fact that my nose was working again and I was able to smell and taste. Just that excitement was amazing. So it made it one of the most memorable wine experiences of my life. Coming out of 14 days, COVID, I don't know. There's just been so many, Dan. It's an unfair question. I love them all. My job. Yeah.
Look, I think on the back of your answer there, most of us, me included, are thinking, I wish I was married to Luvo and guessing Paul Sour 2015 opened on my birthday. 100-point wine, and a wine that's already magnificent, but will only get better and better and better of some time, I suspect. Which leads me back to our opening guest, who I shall return to and do so with a question. Before I ask that question, I see my mum is watching the show from behind her third bottle of lightly wooded Chardonnay. Helen Nicholl, heartbroken that we were no longer depleting Dan's cellar at Christmas. My dear mum, stuck in the UK, cannot fly out to join us. But such a long list compiled from listening to this that we're now planning to come for 6 months just as soon as we can fly. And you will be most welcome when you arrive. The question I referred to comes from Grant Saul. So, Malu, I will throw it your way. Grant asking, can someone give quick feedback on Thai-Bosch Crescendo? Is it a keeper or drink now and store some in the cellar future? Malu, I presume you've had some of what is now a platter 5-star wine, given that any award in this country now has to be signed off by you before it gets it. What are your thoughts on the rebirth of Crescendo?
Definitely keep some to cellar. You can drink it now. I actually enjoyed it at La Colombe recently, and I've got a few bottles knocking around here at home. But keep it for a couple of years. It will definitely improve with age.
I would tend to agree. I've spent a bit of time down at Thai Bush this year. Beautiful spot. They've got their Pink Valley Rosé place right next door, but that crescendo has taken the original and just given it something very special indeed. Also, Cabernet Franc on the way as well. Exciting times at Thai Bush. Right, Malu Lambert, from the 82,612 bottles of wine that you have tasted over the course of 2021, to a roll of drums and much excited anticipation, what have been your favorites from this year?
Oh my gosh. Can I just say no? Can I just keep it to myself? The Restless River Ava Maria Chardonnay was the outstanding wine of the year for me, for sure. The best release yet. It was just such a pleasure to taste this wine, I cannot tell you. It's got a little bit more weight than it has had in previous vintages, but this just adds to its depth of flavor intensity. It's really just a knockout. And if you want to taste modern Cape Chardonnay at its very finest, this is the Restless River. It comes from a teeny tiny 0.5 hectare single vineyard in the Himalayan Arder. And winemaker Craig is obsessive in his pickings. So he does a couple of passes to the vineyard, generally around 5, to get that. He builds complexity with his picking times. And this vintage, he went through 9 times. So it's super obsessive, super complex, and just a beautiful, beautiful wine. So I can easily say that's probably my top white of the year. Some other wines that I enjoyed was the Tessalonga Cortez. I tasted it recently with the rest of the new releases. And just a note on Tessalonga, this is probably one of the best releases to date. It's just showing such poise and focus and confidence, and really clean, beautiful wines. And the Cortez is at the very top of this. It's just, if you want to understand the concept of tension in a wine, this is the wine for you. Then I love Semillon. Semillon is my favorite varietal, especially old vine Semillon. And look, early in the year, I tried the Dark Side of the Vine by Black Elephant Vintners, and it properly blew me away. Beautiful intensity and depth of fruit, coming from a vineyard planted in 1905, which is just crazy to think about in itself. And lovely kind of duality of super rich and concentrated fruit, but so lifted by freshness. So that's a really, really special wine, and it takes you on a journey in the glass for sure. So those are some of the whites. The red I kind of have like a category in mind. I've been really excited by Syrah this year. I've tasted a lot of Syrah. I've done quite a few panel tastings with Syrah. I've also tasted a lot of Syrah from platters and taste. So I've been tasted quite broadly across the spectrum, and it's definitely, in my opinion, the most exciting red wine cultivar we have in terms of newness and quality, and the barrier to entry is much lower than, say, something like Cabernet, which you have to have a little bit of new oak in. I mean, don't give me an unoaked Cabernet. I want some new oak with my Cabernet. But Syrah, you can have old oak, you can have a little bit of new oak, you can have no oak. It's a really a grape that responds easily to winemaking and is very reflective of its terroir. And some of the most exciting wines we have coming out of South Africa right now, Syrah. So you look at the Cravens, Sons of Sugarland, Damascene, Signs of Sinai. Tessalonga is the dark side. It's a very beautiful wine. But I think I'll just mention one because I really like this person. His name is Sam Lamson. He's only 24 years old, and he makes a Syrah called Stars in the Dark, sourced from the Agulhas area. That's another good thing about Agulhas is they do Syrah very well, as well as Sauvignon Blanc. And he's just got such great energy about him and a really great future ahead of him. I would definitely say he's one to watch. And this Syrah Stars in the Dark is quite something.
I think that's actually one of the wines that my mum discovered over in Northern Ireland. I'm not sure how she got her hands on it, but she loved it, and she's usually a pretty good source of wine encouragement. None more so than my panel today. And Malu, thank you. A very difficult job there, cutting down the vast amount of wine you get to taste and distilling it into just a handful. A handful picked up by, amongst others, Hein. Thank you all. We'll do my part here in Sweden to drink as much South African wine as possible to support the local industry. Thanks for the great tips. Well, no thanks to me, thanks to my guests who have been fabulous. Luvo from the One&Only, opening on the 17th of December. There are actually people queuing outside already to get in there. So if you want to get in there on day one, you better go and join that queue quickly. Well Read Wine Magazine and Bubbles Hyland. If you haven't been onto Well Read, it's a wonderful resource, very passionate as well as very skilled understanding of the South African wine world, and some great writing there. If you're up in the Johannesburg area, Zoo is just fabulous. It's weird and cool and awesome, and it's got a wonderful wine list. David Higgs's latest spot, and Stephanie and her team overseeing the wine list there. And then the fabulous Malu Lambert, who's I think on every single judging panel in South Africa at the moment, and writing for just about everybody and doing a wonderful, wonderful job. Check her out at malulambert.com. So sadly, we didn't get a chance to speak to Joseph Dhafana. He was having some connection issues in Elgin. I'm going to try and drag him in on Thursday, when we also have Ross Anderson from the Global Fine Wine Challenge, as well as Miguel Chan, who's the group sommelier, Sogo-san and one or two other special guests. But for now, to Luvo and to Bubbles and Stephanie and to Malu, guys, thank you to all four of you, almost at the end of the year. It's always a pleasure hanging out with you, drinking wine with you. And my only sadness is I haven't done nearly enough of it in person. So in 2022, I look forward to much wine with all four of you and to another great year celebrating what I think collectively we'll agree is the world's greatest wine country. So thank you to all of you. Really appreciate the time.
Cheers.
Thank you,
Yes, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much.
There we go. What a collection. Sommeliers, wine writers, but most importantly, passionate South African wine people, giving us a wonderful summary of the wine year that has been 2021. And for all its disaster, there has been a raft of good news stories from the wine world. And you got a pretty good selection of them there from four of the best. Grant Saul's great advice. Thank you, guys. Well, Grant, I've been writing down notes. I suspect you have as well, as we come to the end of our penultimate show. There'll be some recorded ones through the month of December and early into January, but just the one more live show, that will be on Thursday as we wrap up 2021 and another very, very busy year. So big thank you to all of our guests. Thank you too to Rake Neertling and his team at Pearl Valley and Val de Vie hosting us down here today, and to Maps Mapanyane, whose dinner I'm off to now after his golf day, in support of the Bursary Network, which is doing terrific work to get kids who don't have the financial wherewithal to get into universities that their aptitude certainly makes them deserving of. And so supporting that cause is a great way to bring this year to an end as well. Check it out, the Bursary Network. You can find that on the interweb with a quick search. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Enjoy some fantastic wine. Take to heart those recommendations, not just wine, but wine drinking destinations from our quartet of guests. Keep drinking and supporting South African wine. And I'll see you back again on Thursday for one last live show for the year. Goodbye. To join the Pick and Pay Wine Club, simply SMS your smart shopper number 36775. It's absolutely free, and you'll get for yourself 3 times the smart shopper points on every bottle of wine bought. You'll also get a 20% discount on 10 different wines each month, a 25% discount on a case of wine, and a Magnum, some terrific competitions and invitations to awesome events.